Welcome and well met, all my fellow adventurers. Thank you for joining me today for our next lesson, where we dive once more into the history of Hydaelyn, or Etheirys if you prefer to call it. This is going to be part 4, where we'll be picking up where we left off from our last lesson, so please sit back as we discuss the Calamity of Fire and the Third Era. Now, with so much happening in this era, especially with the rise and fall of the Allegan Empire, I feel that it may be a bit too much for one video, so instead we will be focusing on just the important details involving the Allegons. But I do plan on doing a separate video dedicated to the ancient but advanced empire later down the line. Also, before we jump straight into the Third Era, we will have a quick recap from our last lesson where we discussed the Calamity of Lightning, as well as the Second Era. This was the era known as the Age of Prayer. In fact, the term faith in above was a common saying during this era as well. After the Calamity of Lightning, theocracies replaced the monarchies as the churches grew in power. It was also kind of a renaissance of the arts, because crafts like painting, goldsmithing, and stonemasonry were perfected during this time. Now, moving on to the events that led to the Third Umbral Calamity, or the Calamity of Fire, it started during the end of the Second Era, where faith in the gods caused the churches to grow in power enough to rival any kingdom. The more powerful that they grew, however, the more corrupted their leaders became. Soon, rival religions were turning against each other, which led to infighting between other nations, and ultimately leading to a dark age of holy wars, witch hunts, and even gruesome exorcisms. It is theorized that the Ascians may have been the ones to have triggered this by sowing seeds of distrust and chaos amongst the highest members of the churches. Either way, what anyone will tell you is that this was a dark age where rivaling religions led entire armies to invade each other, resulting in towns being burned to the ground, children being sold into slavery, and leading to the deaths of thousands upon the battlefields. Even those who were able to avoid the fighting and were able to stay at home weren't spared the terrible atrocities of war. Because with little to no one left to tend the fields, crops withered and led to starvation. Meaning that even though the victors of these wars acquired wealth from all over, such riches became utterly useless overnight because there was nothing left for them to spend their money on. Theologians believe that the gods grew weary of mankind's hubris and decided to humble them once again. But we actually know the real cause for all that, because one of the shards was prime and ready for another rejoining. In the following moons, the sun grew large, parching the earth as an intense heat wave dried up lakes and rivers, while fields and lush forests were reduced to dust-choked wastelands as wildfires spread and the people were stricken with famine. Fossil evidence found in Thanalan suggests that the deserts that now make up the southern part of Eorzea were once lush grasslands before the fires began. And thus did the Third Umbral Calamity, having been fueled by the rejoining of the Second Shard, come unto the world, bringing an end to the Second Era and the Calamity of Fire. Now, this all happened approximately 6,000 years ago, which would give way to what would be known as civilization at its most prosperous time, at least in terms of technological advancement and overall influence on the rest of the star. For this was the birth of the Allegan Empire, which spread as far north to Ishabard, east to Othard, and south to Mericidia. It's difficult to say how long the Calamity of Fire lasted, but it had to take place over the course of several months, possibly even years, before the temperature cooled down and rains returned to wash away the ash of the old. In the wake of the Calamity came the Third Umbral Era, where the people were disenfranchised of the idea of worship, and many lost their faith in the aftermath. The survivors came together and decided to focus more upon the growth of mankind, and put their efforts into finding discoveries with both technology and magic, advancing their civilization at an unnatural rate, which would lead to the foundation of the most innovative civilization that ever existed. and the one responsible for this would be the man who would one day become both the first and later on the final leader of this empire. This man's name was Xande. Xande started off as a leader during the early days of the Third Astral Era, and it was he who united the people who wished to advance technology, and he even welcomed the descendants of the priests and mages of the Second Astral Era. He was the one who encouraged them to push the boundaries of their studies until they were able to combine the two, thus was the birth of etherochemistry. Thanks to this discovery, that was what laid the groundwork for the peoples of Allag to advance further than anyone could have imagined. Entire cities were built in the wake of this, while technological marvels were eventually dreamt of and created, such as airships and other modes of transportation, which also led to weapons and biotech that combined living beings with machines to fuel their wars. By the time that Xande died, his carefully groomed descendants fostered the growth of the empire by dispatching their ever-growing armies to the far corners of Ishabard and Othard. In time, the three great continents had all fallen and were united under the Allagan banner. When the fighting finally died down to allow peace to reign, the people thrived as more technological marvels were constructed. The focus of the empire shifted after the wars from expanding its borders to bettering the lives of those who lived within them. One such undertaking was the construction of a spire to be built at Silver Tear Falls. This was the construction of Circus Tower, or the Crystal Tower as we know it as today. And its original purpose was to gather the very rays of the sun and deliver that solar energy to power the homes and factories of the empire. With this, the people were then free to continue on with the betterment of mankind. And for centuries afterwards, peace reigned, and the bloodshed that created the empire was but a dark spot on what many would consider to be the history of paradise. But after 300 years of peace, the once proud empire started to fall to indolence. With machines taking care of most of the work for the people, the need for new discoveries and innovation waned, until the people grew complacent, content with their lives being automated. This was the start of the decline for the once great civilization. The empire was decaying from the inside out as birth rates dropped and even suicide became ever more common, which led to the leaders of this nation becoming corrupted, thus giving way to uprisings by the people. When the empire was at its lowest point, a scientist by the name of Amon sought to restore Allag to its former glory. However, he came to believe that it wasn't because the people were lacking in knowledge that their empire was failing. Quite the opposite, he believed that they perhaps had too much knowledge. It's what the people were lacking right now that was the problem, and that was a leader to inspire and lead them. But with even the royal family having fallen out of favor with the people, he came to believe that only the first emperor could turn things around at this stage. Thus began his research to attain immortality and resurrection. Over the course of a few years, countless experiments upon rebels and insurgents, and even using both himself and the members of the royal family as lab rats, going as far as to creating clones of them all, he was successful in reviving the same emperor who once built up the empire. Emperor Xande lived again. After Amon informed the newly revived Xande of the situation, Xande had the current reigning emperor assassinated before he retook the throne. He rebuilt his army back to its former strength so that he could continue to wage war against the land that he wasn't able to conquer when he was alive before. And so now, he planned to take over the home of the dragons of Mericidia. As Amon had hoped, Xande was able to inspire the people once again, spearheading the further developments for weapons of war as they prepared for their future invasion of Mericidia. And at first they were able to take the Mericidians by surprise and push them back as they made their way inland. However, when they came to time to battle with the dragons, they made short work of their weapons and drove them back to the beaches. This battle was constantly shifting back and forth while the Allagans began their darker experiments such as chimerobiology, so that they could create horrific beasts to fight for them. In the end, not even Bahamut, one of the first brood, was able to stand against them for long, as he was slain and the empire continued their march inward. With Bahamut having fallen, the Mericidians had grown desperate and tried to summon their own gods to fight for them, which is the first summoning rituals that were recorded and also believed to have been taught by the Ascians. What anyone can tell you was that they were successful in summoning 3 beings to continue raging war against the Allagons. We have Sephiroth the Fiend, Sophia the Goddess, and Zurvan the Demon, also known as the Warring Triad. Thanks to the new strength of these primals, or icons as the Allagons called them, the Mericidians were able to drive the Allagons back as far as to the shores of their land. For it didn't matter how many times the gods fell before them, they would simply be revived by the people's ever-growing faith. In fury, Xande demanded his mages to find a way to solve this problem, or they would start to lose their heads. And I mean that literally. He threatened that he would kill one of them a day until they came up with a way to prevent the Warring Triad from being summoned again and again. Eventually, though, they were able to find a way to be able to neutralize the summoned gods by imprisoning them instead, where they would later be locked away upon the newly built floating island of Azus Law, where they would be able to discover the secrets of both primal summoning and containment. This was a short-lived victory, however, for in her grief, Bahamut's mate Tiamat heeded the words of the Ascians and summoned Bahamut back once more. But what they actually summoned was just a twisted shade of the Dawn Worm, and though he was able to drive back the Empire once again, he scorched the earth and ruled as a tyrant until the Empire launched its final assault. The bloody war came to an end when Xande, who had developed a bloodlust for this war, reached out to the denizens of the Void and created a pact with the Cloud of Darkness. In exchange for allowing her and other Void sent into their realm to feast on ether, they were to fight in this war for Xande, which ended up turning the tides of battle for the final time. Eventually, they were able to find a way of capturing the primal Bahamut by overwhelming the Mericidian horde, possibly thanks to the use of the weapon Omega, and Mericidia finally fell. With Mericidia having fallen and Bahamut imprisoned with Neuralinks, the Empire was truly unstoppable at this point. Yet with no other reason to continue on his bloody crusade, Xande could feel the presence of death and the meaninglessness sink upon his life once more, which was ultimately what drove him mad. If everything that we have is built to fade away, what would be the point? And in the end, he sought to put an end to all life so that everyone could experience what it was he yearned for. With Bahamut sealed inside a massive satellite, which we would know later on to become Dalamud, he had it launched into the heavens so that he could use the Primal's ether to gather more energy into the Crystal Tower, so that he could create a gate large enough to bring the Cloud of Darkness into this world and have the denizens of the Void ultimately destroy the Source. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, many were opposed to this plan, even the surviving members of the royal family, and thus did a violent civil war break out amongst the people. Many fought to reach and put an end to Xande before he could create the gate, but Xande was already sealed up inside the Crystal Tower. He activated Dalamud remotely to start accumulating energy into the tower directly. This, however, would be the catalyst that would put an end to his great empire, because the large amounts of ether from Dalamud were so powerful that the very earth beneath the tower began to crumble, setting off a series of earthquakes that would cause the once mighty empire to fall at last. And thus were we upon the cusp of the fourth Umbral Calamity, the Calamity of Earth. And that's about it for now. I know that there's a lot more to the story, and I did end up glossing over some information that we do have on the Allagons. But like I said, this lesson was mostly to discuss the main events of the third Astral era, which was around 6,000 to 5,000 years ago, with the fourth Umbral Calamity happening roughly 5,000 years ago. I am planning on doing another video discussing more of the Allagons in the more details, like I said, but just to quickly summarize what we just learned. People decided to work more towards the betterment of mankind rather than the faith in the gods. Xande was one of the leading figures during this time, and he welcomed people of all races to join him as they worked to advance both technology and magic, which led to the discovery of ethochemistry. Xande would later be crowned the first emperor after he established the Allagan Empire. And Allag ended up conquering much of the world, especially the 3 great continents, and later on Mericidia. Even after Xande's death, his descendants would work on further development of their civilization for the people, such as building the circus tower to harness solar energy, and even going up as far as to develop space travel. Allag lived in peace for about 300 years before their civilization started to fall into declinement. Amon, believing that they needed a real leader to pull them out of this, resurrected Xande to revitalize the empire. Xande decided to invade Mericidia, which would lead to the death of Bahamut, and Tiamat to revive him as a primal by the Ascians' words. These also happened to have the first records of primals being summoned in the form of the Warring Triad, which were of course sealed away on Azys Lla, while the primal Bahamut was defeated and sealed within Dalamud, and Tiamat was also taken to Azys Lla. Xande then made a deal with the Cloud of Darkness to bring about the end of the world, but an uprising forced Xande to enact his plan a little too hastily, and the power from Dalamud caused a series of earthquakes, which of course caused the Calamity of Earth and leading to the 4th Umbral era. And that should be it for now, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed this history lesson and you're looking forward to the next one, which is going to be talking more details about the Calamity of Earth, as well as the aftermath after the fall of the Allagons. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe down below for more videos like this one, and I hope that you look forward to what's coming next. But until next time, everyone, may you walk in the light of the crystal.